We would shoot on location, and some stuff that was in a location was there because we rented that house, and the wall color was the wall color. So there's only so much you're going to do. But in animation, everything has to be put in. So every decision, everything was there for a reason. So the animator is not going to just randomly put something in the background. They're going to think about it. And every noise, every background bird chirping, every car, they'll choose. If there's a car in the background, well, they have to choose the car. It could be a truck. It could be a moped. They're going to choose it. And so they're going to figure, well, why am I choosing a truck versus a moped? There's going to be a reason to it. And so there are no accidents, and they always use the script as that guide. You're listening to Screenwriters Need to Hear This with Michael Jamin. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Screenwriters Need to Hear This, the podcast. I'm Michael Jamin. I'm here with Phil Hudson. Hello. Say hi, Phil.
Hi. It's me.
See, he said, I told you, I knew you could do it. So today's podcast is called Writing is Fractals, because I wanted to come up with a title that would be hard to understand.
And boring for anyone who thinks fractals are math, which I've learned are not.
Yep, I'm already bored with this podcast episode. But for those who don't know, a fractal is a never-ending pattern. Like you might see it in nature. It's where you see a piece, when a piece of something viewed up close looks like the same as the larger overall chunk. So for example, a mountain, if you see a mountain, you see the general shape of a mountain from like a satellite or something, and you move in closer, then you'll see the rocks, and the rocks, like a boulder, will have the shape of a mountain. Then you move in closer, and like a clump of dirt will have a shape of a mountain. And under a microscope, it'll have the shape of a mountain. It's constantly repeating. Or a shoreline is a good example of this. From outer space, you'll see that a weird jagged shoreline. And as you get closer and closer, you see that same jagged shape occur again and again and again. Another example would be a cloud, or a cauliflower has that weird shape. There's like a broccoli cauliflower, a green one, has like a spiral shape to it that repeats over and over again. A fern is the same. Another example of a fractal would be if a tree has the shape of a trunk, and the limbs, the branches. And if you take a leaf from that tree and you turn it over and you look at the backside, you'll notice that the leaf has veins on it, and that those veins look like a tree. And then if you were to zoom in even closer to the veins, you'd see the capillaries, and those are in the shape of a tree. It's just like this, it's nature repeats itself. And that's how it grows. So it's very common to see fractals. And my point is, writing is a fractal as well. And so the bigger shape would be a season arc. People say, well, how do you come up with a season arc? Well, a season arc is really just one long story that occurs over, let's say, 6 episodes or 10 episodes. It's just one overall giant story. But if you take that story, you take that whole arc and you break it down into episodes. Now, each episode has to have the shape of a story in it. And then if you go break that down into an act, each act has to have a shape of a story. Each scene has to have a shape of a story. And each line of dialogue has to further the shape of that story. It has to have that function. It's not just random stuff that people say. So writing, in a way, really is a fractal if you look at it that way. And it's important to recognize this, because this helps you understand story and story structure. That's why I always say, man, if you got to understand, how are you going to create an arc if you don't understand story structure? How are you going to write a scene or a line of dialogue if you don't understand story structure? Because you're repeating these. It's a fractal. You're repeating it over and over again. So you better understand what you're talking about. Now, one other thing is, when you talk about your story structure, the showrunner or the writer creates this episode or an arc, and everyone else who's involved in the show, once we turn that episode over, everyone else involved in the show, the actor, the director, cinematographer, hair, makeup, wardrobe, lighting, production design, everybody, they are now in service of that story. So they're using the story as a roadmap.
Yeah, and we've talked about this before. In Spanish, el guión is the term for screenplay, and that is the guide.
The guide, right? Interesting. Yeah. So it's a guide. You're turning over a guide. It's no longer the writers. It's everyone's now. You turn it over. It's the show's now. And even when we were running Marin, we would, like, the department heads, like, I remember the wardrobe. She would be like, well, what should the character wear? What do you think the character should wear in this scene? And I remember saying, well, what do you think the character should wear? She goes, well, I think whatever. She'd throw out some ideas. I was like, well, that sounds good. And she was getting those ideas because she read the script, because she knew the series. It wasn't like she was pulling it up, she was making it up. She was like, if the character wears plaid in this scene, dark plaid, I think it helps further whatever. accentuate whatever we were going for. And years after we ran Marin for 4 years, and a couple of years ago, I met up with the production designer. We met for coffee, and we were just talking. And the shape of he worked on the final season, well, maybe the final two, but definitely the final season. And the shape of the final season was, the arc of it was, Mark is in rehab. We open, he's in rehab. He's kind of ruined his life. Now he's in rehab. He's trying to repair things, get sober. We spent a couple episodes there. Then he gets out of rehab and he's lost. He has no place to live. Where is he going to stay? He's trying to find himself. And then the final couple episodes, he moves. He has a kid. He kind of finds himself. And so this guy I met with, the production designer, he's like, I don't know if you realize this, but in the background, we played with this theme. So every time there was artwork in the background, whether it was a photograph or a framed photograph or a magazine cover, or I think that we did a scene at a coffee house, and in the coffee house, there was a lot of artwork for like local bands, and they put their cover art on these posters. Everywhere you saw a person's image, in the first few episodes, they were always in silhouette. You never saw a full face. You never saw details. But as the season progressed, things came more in focus, and then the background art would be more in focus. And then by the last couple episodes, he was showing actual faces, real people. And he was like, this is our subtle way of showing that Mark was finding himself. And it was reflected. And I saw each episode 100 times, and I never saw it. But I just loved the fact that he gave it that kind of thought. And he was telling a story within a story by choosing what he wanted to show in the background. And I just thought it was brilliant. And if it were a giant decision, he probably would have wanted to bounce it off of us to make sure we were cool with it. But I guess he knew it was subtle, and he didn't feel like the need to, and it was fine. But the fact that he didn't need to was only because he was using the script as a guide. He didn't need to ask if I thought it was about that. He was using the script as a guide. And so that's why it's always so important to understand story structure. It's all there,
Yeah, absolutely. While you were talking, I thought of acting for life classes that I took with Jill Sholin, one of our good friends. And she said, I just remember very clearly saying, like, that whole process was you read whatever scene you were given one time, and then you read it with the other person. You act it out, and you hold the script in front of you so you can read your lines, but you were just glimpsing what you could from that first pass. And she would say over and over again, it's in the page. The writer put the info you need right there. You don't need to think more about it. It's all right there. And it was a very eye-opening experience as a writer, having to act from the words another writer put on the page, because it's what you're talking about.
That's why I think actors should study writing, because if you think, it's all on the page. And if it's not on the page, it's bad writing. But if hopefully you're auditioning for something that's good and you're not getting mixed messages, because obviously with bad writing, you could have lines that conflict with each other. And it's like, well, I don't get what I'm going for here. So that's sloppy writing. But it should all be there.
Yeah. And we geeked out on, we've talked about that production designer a couple times, that nuance of that there. And I've never thought about it in terms of the fact that it was literally setting up, it was mimicking the arc of the season in the background. I think we nerded out on that pretty hard. I thought it was a beautiful note. And I've definitely seen some people on Tacoma FD, the show that I've been working on, I've seen some of our art department do some of those nuances. Those tend to be a little bit more jokey because that's the tone of our show. But they embed those things that kind of play off, and you can kind of look back and say, oh, that's funny. They put that there. And it definitely plays into something you find out later in the episode. And it's just, it all elevates what you're seeing. And, what that specifically mise en scène, as we're taught in film school, is like everything that's in the scene. Everything in that box that you see is there for a purpose, and it is just to elevate what the story is saying.
It's even more so on animation, because like even on Marin, we would shoot on location, and some stuff that was in a location was there because we rented that house, and the wall color was the wall color. So there's only so much you're going to do. But in animation, everything has to be put in. So every decision. Everything was there for a reason. So the animator's not going to just randomly put something in the background. They're going to think about it. And every noise, every background bird chirping, every car, they'll choose, if there's a car in the background, well, they have to choose the car. It could be a truck. It could be a moped. They're going to choose it. And so they're going to figure, well, why am I choosing a truck versus a moped? There's going to be a reason to it. And so there are no accidents, and they always use the script as that guide. And so it's super important, especially whether you want to be a writer or a director or have someone direct your work or direct your own work. You know, the script is everything. It's got to be the script. It's got to be the script, you know?
Yeah. You mentioned that you have to learn story to do that. And I think that's kind of been the impetus for this whole podcast is in everything you've ever said. Down to the first email lesson you ever sent me was this: what is a story? Define a story. For those of you who haven't downloaded the free lesson that Michael gives out, go do that. It's michaeljamin.com/free, where that's literally what you talk about, because it is the most fundamental part of this. One of the questions that I've seen a lot of people talk about in the writers group from the students, as well as on your social media, there are a lot of questions about, like, how do I break a season arc? How do I do a whole season? And what you said was that the structure of a season is the structure of an episode, which is the structure of a scene, which is the structure of the dialogue. Yeah. So do you agree with that when you're breaking a season? Are you looking at it from the perspective of beginning, middle, end, 3-act structure?
Well, it just depends. Like, my partner, we meant to sell, it was a limited series. I think it was for Netflix, based on a book they bought. They bought the rights to a book. Like, I think it was a young adult novel. And they go, hey, can you turn this into a TV show? Hey, can you turn this book into a TV show? And so we worked on it. Sure. And so that's how we approached that. I think it was like they wanted 6 episodes. So we thought we broke it up. We broke up the book and go, okay, this from here to here, from page 1 to whatever, 80, that'll be 1 episode. And we didn't break it down by numeric, but we didn't go by numbers. We figured, well, this shape, what this occurs in the book, this could be a whole episode. This could be another episode. And so that, again, was breaking it down in terms of, that's exactly how we did it. We broke it down by as if it were a 3-act play. The entire series was a 3-act play. And then, of course, each episode is a 3-act play, and each, so that's how you break it down further and further. But if I were selling, I guess, an ordinary, that was unusual because they wanted a limited series based on a property. But if I were just selling a regular TV show, I probably wouldn't do that. I would say, hey, here's the first episode, and here's 3 other episodes potential. And that usually is enough. They don't usually, at least for comedy, they don't usually want to know the whole shape of the scene. And I'm always relieved. Like, I always get upset when they do want to know that, because there's so much more we will discover as we start writing. We will discover the shape. Like, even someone made a comment about, I think on my social media, that they read that J.J. Abrams didn't know the end of Lost when they were for selling the pilot. And I'm like, of course he didn't know. How could he possibly know? That show is so complicated. And even the first season, they had storylines that went dead end. They just didn't go anywhere, and they jettisoned them. But had they said, well, no, we promised the executives that this would be the shape of season 1, so we better stick to this bad storyline instead of this one that we found in the process of writing that's better. Like, why would they stick to the one that was bad if they thought they found something better, And that's what they did. Yeah. And so I get annoyed by that when I see, like, hey, what's the whole shape of the series? Like, I don't know. Let me find it. Hi, guys. It's Michael Jamin. I wanted to take a break from talking and talk just a little bit more. I think a lot of you people are getting bad advice on the internet. Many of you want to break into the industry as writers or directors or actors, and some of you are paying for this advice on the internet. It's just bad. And as a working TV writer and showrunner, this burns my butt. So my goal is to flush a lot of this bad stuff out of your head and replace it with stuff that's actually going to help you. So I post daily tips on social media. Go follow me at Michael Jamin Writer. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook and TikTok. And let's be honest, if you don't have time, like just 2 minutes a day towards improving your craft, it's not going to happen. So go make it happen for you at Michael Jamin Writer. Okay, now back to my previous rant.
Javier Grillo-Marxuach, on his website, he has a whole set of information where he talks about what it was like in the writer's room, episode 3, right? Because it was a 2-part pilot. And it's very much they were figuring it out as you go. This advice you're giving right now really strikes me as contrary to what a lot of people say. I think in film school we had showrunners for Longmire, and we had other showrunners come in and talk to us. And one of the things that they would say is like, you need to know what your first 100 episodes are, and you need to know your whole episode. Like, what is episode 100? Not first 100, but what is episode 100? Because these are the things that people are going to ask, because they wanted syndication. They wanted something that would go that way. And I was in a writers group this morning, kind of talking about my experience as a writer's PA, and that was something that came up, was how are you guys thinking about your seasons? And I was like, well, we know where the cliffhanger was for the end of last season. We resolved that in episode 1 of this season. And then we think about what's the cliffhanger for the end of this season. But in between that, it's just standalone episodes. So I think that I'm wondering, is that the difference between an episodic versus a serialized show?
Yeah, I mean, and those guys, who am I to say how they went to pitch Longmire? If they needed to have 4 seasons thought out, then they did. I wasn't in the room, so maybe they did. But my point also is, like, you don't need to. That's something they needed to worry about, because they're high level writers getting this pitch. Everyone else listening to this, you don't need to worry about that. Your job is to write one damn good script. You don't, not 100. Don't worry about it. You're not there yet. How about you just concentrate on one script so that you can get the right to do the other stuff?
Michael, I can't tell you. Everyone listening to this right now is probably screaming, because no one else is talking about this way. The advice that is being given in screenwriting classes by professionals online, by script gurus, like, they're telling you need to have a story Bible, and you need to have your first series, the whole season broken. You need to have a lookbook put together. You need to do all these things. And to put this in the case, like, I've read lots of scripts this year as part of my ability to really learn how to identify story structure as you teach it, and say what's going on, how can I give notes on these to figure out story. And one of the things I read, these writers were like, hey, I've written an entire series, here's the pilot episode. And I read it, and I was just thinking, wow, like, this really feels like it's a lot of people doing things and nothing happening, which is, I think, where most people start. And then I got on a phone with them, and they described what the first season was. I was like, that's your pilot episode. So you have now written 8 episodes of something that should be episode 1, right? And you wasted how many hours doing that, instead of making one really, really good version of that.
Make one really good episode, and then worry about how you're going to spend your syndication money later.
Yeah.
Like, what?
But the advice you're giving is, don't worry about trying to sell your series. Just write a really good episode as a calling card. And if it's that good, A, you'll get a staffing job, which is really the goal. B, if it's so good, lightning strikes and you get an offer, they like it so much, they're probably going to help work through the other things with you.
They'll sign someone to help you with it. They'll say, great, what are the other 99? And you'll say, you're not going to say, oh, I don't know. You'll come up with it. Like, you should have such problems that they love your first episode much that they want another 99. So,
but we as young writers are just wasting our time spending hours and hours learning how to break seasons and how to do this stuff, because it's not actionable for what we are going to do. And I'm sure, again, lightning does strike, but I imagine if you're that good that you write something that really speaks, you're going to have no problem breaking the rest of your season, right? It's not a skill set you need to develop right now.
I talk about my book that I'm working on, A Paper Orchestra. It's a collection of essays. I know we mentioned this quite a bit, but when I first set out, I knew I wanted a lot of stories. I figured I'd probably need around 21 stories, and that's how many I had. But when I first started, I was like, I just need to write one. And then I finished that one. I go, I just need to write one more. Like, the idea of doing 20, I would have never gotten it done. It was just too daunting. How about I just write one good story at a time and then see what happens after that? And so, even now, the idea of coming up with an arc for a show is like, how about I just come up with an episode? That's hard enough, And even on Tacoma, the guys wrote themselves up. The last episode for last season was, okay, the station house burns down. What are we going to do now? And I remember even thinking, I was like, I don't know, guys, aren't we writing ourselves up a tree here? And you're like, we'll worry about it later if they pick up another season. Like, we'll worry about it later.
I covered in the writer's room, and I remember one of the writers was like, am I the only person concerned that we're basically giving them a very clean way to end our show and cancel this? And they're like, but it is what it is.
They brought more, so it was okay.
Yeah. So this just also reminds me, and I think I brought it up. There was another young writer who messaged me on Instagram, and he follows the podcast, and so I was like talking to him, and he was just talking about how much he loves world building, and that's the thing he fell in love with, and that's what he loves spending his time on. And my note to him was like, but that's not the job of a writer. Like the world accentuates what's happening in the story, right? The story is fundamentally the human aspect of this story. What is the emotional weight of this story, and why do we care about the emotional? Everything else, as I understand it, as I get better at writing, is just everything is a layer that accentuates the problems or the conflict to drive the story forward. It doesn't. Your story doesn't serve the world.
Yeah, right. So when he was world building, he was creating fictional characters and weird characters.
So my opinion here, and I could be completely wrong, is that a lot of this comes from the world of Harry Potter, where she sat down and she would just write and she'd figure out, so she knew like what a muggle was and what a wizard was and what a witch was and what the history was of the school and what the history of the school is, and like all these things and these stories that go in and like the nuances and the detail. And I think that a lot of young writers love that. They love Lord of the Rings. They love, a lot of these fantasy and sci-fi worlds that are rich and built out and developed, which I get and I love and I spend a lot of time doing too as a young writer. But that's not writing. Writing is story, and you have to understand story structure to do that.
Right. I mean, if I were to explain to you all the characters in my show, hey, this character, I got a character this, I got a character that, I got a policeman, I got a fireman. Okay, great. What's the story? Okay, you told me who the characters are, but what's happening? Oh, I don't know that yet. Oh, okay, well, I want you to tell me a story. I don't want you to list the characters, the cast of characters. It's not interesting. So,
and so for anyone listening, I think that I'm just really highlighting this because I do believe that the majority of writers who are writing right now, trying to break in, are spending an exorbitant amount of time working on things that are not actually serving them in their ability to become a writer. And so the goal here is, I want to get staffed as a TV writer. And that should be the goal. And so what are the things that work towards that? As you've laid out in this podcast, from a fractal perspective, everything stems from one nuance, and that is story structure. And so obviously you have a course where you teach story structure. You've got a bunch of free content on your social media you put out about story structure. There are a lot of books that I've got on my shelves right here behind John Wick and his dog and Ludo from The Labyrinth. But a lot of these books are about writing and screenwriting and these things. And I think I spent a lot of time worried about formatting and these things, which software will basically do for you now. None of those things really taught me story structure the way that you lay it out. And the conversation I had with a couple other writers I was on a call with this morning too, and these guys have had options. They've got something at CBS right now. They've taken your course, and they said the benefit of your course is that it says what everyone else is saying in a way that is easy to understand. Like there are a lot of people teaching this, but they're talking about it from Joseph Campbell's, Campbell myth structure, or you're talking about it from 8-point plot points, and none of that really is talking about what matters. Plot is half the story, but the reason we watch is the emotional story,
right?
And that comes from vulnerability, which we've talked about a lot on this podcast. What advice do you have for young writers to develop their ability to tell a story and be vulnerable?
My daughter is she's getting into writing now, and she gave me a piece to read, and she was stuck on it. She didn't know what the character is supposed to do in this scene. We were talking about it. I go, she wrote something. I go, but does that feel true to you? And she goes, I guess not. And I go, doesn't this feel more truthful? And she goes, yeah, that does feel more truthful. I go, well, there it is. I mean, it's always about finding the truth of the moment. And that takes, I remember, I apologize if I said this before, but like years ago, I had a writing teacher, and he was this old cranky guy, and he was like, you got to get yourself in psychotherapy. And
we talked about Bill Idelson quite a bit.
Yeah. And so he was like, you got to get yourself in psychotherapy. And I was like, well, why? I'm not crazy. And then he was like, because I didn't, what I know, and he was like, his point was, he didn't really make this point, but I recognize what the point is now. If you don't understand yourself, you don't understand how you work and all your problems that make you human and make you make bad decisions and all that. If you don't understand how you work, how could you possibly figure out how another character works? You don't even understand yourself. And that's the problem, I think, with young writers, is that you're young and like often you don't know yourself at 18. It's hard to know why you're doing stupid things at 18. And you don't, it's not until you get much older that you can kind of have that perspective. That's one of the advantages, I think, of being older, is that it's easier for you to do all that. But if you can't, right, if you don't get to if you can't get to the bottom of a character, the truth of a moment, then forget it. It's just going to feel cliche. It'll feel like, that's easy, or So that's what I recommend. And to do that, like a super easy way, if you don't want to spend money to go into therapy, just start journaling and writing, in your diary. No one's going to read it. You can lock it up. You don't have to show it to anyone. But what you do have to be is truthful. You have to tell the ugly truth about yourself to yourself, and get there and dig there. Why did I really do this? What was that really about when I yelled at my friend like that? What was that really about? And that's hard. But once you get there, you go, oh, now I understand why characters do stupid things.
Yeah. I had a religion teacher who pointed out to me one time in high school that when you're mad at someone, you're never actually mad at that person. You're mad about something else, and that is the outlet for it. And if you take a step back and consider what it is, it's typically something within you that you're mad about. Yeah. And I found that to be very true. I've also, for a lot of people, we've talked about this on podcasts too. I had a hard time even exploring the ugly side of my personality, the darkness, and the fact that I can be mean, and I can be manipulative, and I can be overbearing and stubborn and all of those things. But that's a reality.
And that's all gold to put in your script. That's going to make you rich. So enjoy it, embrace it.
Yeah. So dig deep and figure that stuff out. And then once you know who you are and you can explore those stories, then the story structure just accentuates that, right? And it helps you understand how to drive to a point where it's going to be something engaging we want to watch, and that will help your individual personality and experience is what is the reason we care. The structure is what carries you through to the end. But it's you and your life experience that are going to make it interesting enough for someone to want to read it.
Yeah. And if you can write what they say, write what you know, but that doesn't mean, it can mean, well, I was in the Army. Maybe I should write a story about a guy who's in the Army. Okay, that's an example. But writing what you know also might be about, if you're an incredibly jealous person, then write about jealousy, because you seem to know that very well. It doesn't have to be your, all your material experiences about your travels. It could just be about the emotions that you struggle with. So
yeah, write what you know. I think is another thing that was hard for me to understand for a long time. It's like, oh, I'm a deli boy. What do I know? It's like, no, you've lived an entire life, and I was in my early 20s when I was on a website called Imgur, which is like the image hosting website for Reddit. And I very quickly learned that I am not a unique person. There are so many people, like down to my brother sprayed me in the eyes with Windex when I was a little baby. And ever since, I've had this little bit of a fuzzy scar on my eye. And if I defocus, I can see this kind of flooding, and I can never quite see it because it's not dead center in my eye. And then someone posted an image and photoshopped that in there and says, can never quite see what this thing actually looks like. And there were like thousands of people who were like, I know, it drives me nuts. And I was like, I've never even spoken to anyone about that. Right. But it's that stuff. Like, you are not unique. And so the specificity of you is what people care about. And that's what speaks to them.
Put it in there. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, I think that's a very helpful podcast. Yeah. Anything else you want to add?
That's it. What else? We got a watch. Should we talk about our watch list? We have a watch list, Phil.
We haven't in a little bit. Yeah, we do have a watch list. This is really, we're getting a lot of really good feedback from people. They find it very helpful.
This is for if you'd like to get my top content email to you once a week. This was Phil's idea. Every Friday, we'll send out a newsletter with basically 3 videos for you to watch, and it's absolutely free. You can unsubscribe whenever you want. I'm not going to spam you because it's only once a week. It's every Friday. And to get on it, you go to michaeljamin.com/watchlist. And that's it. And you're all set. All this stuff gets sent to you.
That's good stuff. And then that leads you to a treasure trove of other great information on your social media. You got YouTube, Instagram, TikTok. You're kind of everywhere with lots of good stuff. And
all of it's free. Yeah.
Yep. So go there and leave a review on the podcast. That's something we haven't asked you to do in a while. If you haven't, go leave a written review and let us know what you think. Let us know what we're doing well, what you dislike. Take care. Let us know what we're doing.
Yep, that would be helpful. All right, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. Until our next one. All right, be well.
This has been an episode of Screenwriters Need to Hear This with Michael Jamin and Phil Hudson. If you'd like to support this podcast, please consider subscribing, leaving a review, and sharing this podcast with someone who needs to hear today's subject. For free daily screenwriting tips, follow Michael on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at Michael Jamin Writer. You can follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at Phil A. Hudson. This episode was produced by Phil Hudson and edited by Dallas Crane. Until next time, keep writing.